So let's do a quick recap of the shoulder. First off, remember the natural structure of the shoulder is really built for mobility and less for stability. There's this natural inclination to want to be able to move, which is really helpful since we spend very little time on our hands compared to the amount of time we spend on our feet. What we also see is that there are a couple extra moving parts that create some of that mobility. We have three bones in particular that create the shoulder complex: the clavicle, the scapula, and the humerus. Within that, we've got two bones primarily that we have to really pay attention to stabilizing to create this cohesion and integrity of the joint. We have scapular stabilizers and the humeral stabilizers. The two main scapular stabilizers we looked at were serratus anterior and the rhomboids on the back. Serratus went from the side ribs to the medial border of the scapula, and the rhomboids continued from the medial border of the scapula to the spine. Remember, they worked in opposition to each other so that the rhomboids would retract the scapula and the serratus would protract it. But together, we talked about the primary function being that of stabilizing or supporting the scapula between that antagonistic relationship that helps to keep the scapula on the back. We also talked about this function of the serratus of drawing the scapula onto the rib cage to prevent that winging of the scapula in order to stabilize as that foundational support for what comes all the way down the rest of the arm. So the scapular stability is like the foundation for the rest of the stability for the glenohumeral joint as well as the rest of the arm. So if the scapular stabilizers are functioning properly, I also need the humeral stabilizers functioning in order to create this shoulder stability. The humeral stabilizers we looked at were called the rotator cuff. We have four muscles primarily: subscapularis on the front. On the back, we have infraspinatus and teres minor. And on the top, we have supraspinatus. Subscapularis will internally rotate. The antagonist to that is infraspinatus and teres minor that will externally rotate. And supraspinatus will abduct, abduct. But remember, together, their primary function is to stabilize the head of the humerus in the socket, both front to back and up and down in relationship to gravity. And we looked at several poses that would strengthen and stretch all of those, but primarily for the rotator cuff, remember, we talked about these again being active anytime I'm bearing weight on my hands. And we looked at Gomukhasana as a great way to stretch the rotator cuff since it both externally rotates and internally rotates the shoulder, all in one pose. So the first group of muscles we looked at were the scapular stabilizers. There were two main muscles. Again, I'll leave a pause. You can always pause the video for more time. The two main scapular stabilizers were serratus anterior and the rhomboids. The main function of serratus is protraction and scapular stability. The rhomboids will do retraction as well as scapular stability as well. So we have this antagonistic relationship between the serratus anterior and the rhomboids. The next one we looked at was the humeral head stability. So remember the importance of not only stabilizing the scapula, but also stabilizing the head of the humerus. So we looked at the rotator cuff muscles to create that. We had four main rotator cuff muscles. On the front of the shoulder, we had the subscapularis. Its main function was also to internally rotate the shoulder. The antagonist to that on the back of the rotator cuff, we had infraspinatus and teres minor. Remember the Batman and Robin combo. And their main function is to externally rotate the shoulder. The top of the rotator cuff, we had supraspinatus here. And its main function was abduction. Remember, the primary function of them all together, more than anything, was to stabilize the head of the humerus in the socket, to juggle front to back and up and down the positioning of the humeral head within the glenoid fossa. And remember, the importance of this as stabilizers in order to stabilize the shoulder is both to stabilize the scapula as well as the humerus.